Hello and welcome back to the second set of pods in ARW. In this pod we look at the language choices which are actually available to people in society. It's all very well to theorise about the ways in which English operates as a system of power, but the reality is often very different for individuals. So, let's look at some terms which define this contrast: optionality and choice. Optionality refers to the opportunities offered to an individual for selection, potential. Choice means what persons actually do with this range of options, realised potential. But of course, choice depends on optionality. You can't make a choice where no options are available. The question arises then as to how these conditions arise. Let's look at the modern state of India for an illustration of how opportunities set the conditions for people. India, as an ex-British colony and as an independent nation since 1947, had some important decisions to make. The English language was, in the minds of many politicians, including Gandhi, tainted by association with the British as colonial masters. So, Hindi was installed as the official language of the nation, and states were allowed to determine their own official languages. However, this decision was resented by the many people in India who saw Hindi, not being their own language, as just another linguistic imposition. Eventually, the majority of politicians saw English as being neutral. It was not ethnic-centric, and it seemed to provide a more democratic and socially accessible solution. So, from 1967, English became one of the official languages of India, and it is also popular at the state level as an official lingua franca. Today, between 10 or 30% of the Indian population speak English, and there is a booming economy which relies in many ways on the ability of people to do business with other countries around the world in English. These two circumstances seem to be connected. So, it seems that the government has created conditions where more Indian people have increased optionality for English and for economic advancement. The question remains, of course, as to how many people across Indian society actually have equivalent levels of optionality, and how many people actually make choices for themselves, or if these choices are already made for them. It's the same for us. With English in Australia as the default national language, most choices are already made for us. So, optionality is set by the government. As to our choices, these are fairly limited. The obvious benefit for every Australian is that if we learn English well, we are advantaged. If we want to be bilingual, that is more difficult, since Australia's governmental choices offer us less optionality. If we learn English as our second or other language, or if we learn English in the context of a migrant home where English is not used much or not at all, we are also disadvantaged. It depends on our access to English language learning resources. It also depends on our commitment to learning English. In Sydney, for instance, it is fairly common to have a language other than or in addition to English spoken at home. Professor Zuckerman asserts that bilingualism offers great advantages. It might be more accurate to say that it can, but it is not deterministic. So, start to reflect on how these decisions made on your behalf enhance or limit your access to choices. This is especially pertinent if you have travelled or if you have come from overseas, where English may or may not be dominant. We can organise our reflection by putting this equation into a question. How does English as a global language affect you personally for optionality and for choices? These further questions are part of this same equation. Is English your first or other language? Was English the dominant language used at home? Have you migrated to Australia? Have you travelled overseas and found that English was useful to you, or was it of limited use? If so, how did it make you feel? Do you think you have experienced advantage or disadvantage? In terms of English, how much choice do you have based on these options available to you? Take a look at the map of languages spoken in Sydney. What does it tell us about English as a potential advantage or disadvantage?